Welcome back to Mr. Charles Stories, where every tale holds a mirror to love, sacrifice and second chances. If you've ever protected someone you love at a cost only your heart understands, this story will hold you. If you're new here, go ahead and subscribe, like, and drop your thoughts in the comments below as we journey into another powerful American story. She married a man who didn't smile, not because she loved him, but because he held her brother's future in his hands. Have you ever done something unthinkable for family? Chosen loyalty over your own heart? Watched someone grow colder the closer you tried to get? This is the story of Brenda, a woman who thought she was signing away her freedom in a contract marriage, and Gregory Wells, the billionaire CEO whose heart was locked so tightly no one dared try the key. But what happens when one quiet act of kindness softens a wall no one else could break? And what if the person you were pretending with starts to become the one you can't imagine living without? The rain hadn't stopped in days. It crawled down the floor-to-ceiling windows like it was trying to get in, to remind her that even the sky was tired. Brenda pulled the grey throw closer around her shoulders, though the penthouse was already warm. She didn't feel it. Not anymore. Below, downtown Seattle sparkled in the drizzle, cars slicing through wet streets, people moving with umbrellas and purpose. Somewhere out there, people were laughing, loving, living. In here, silence. She glanced down at her hand. The ring was thin, elegant. Gregory had picked it, no questions asked, no input needed. Just an email from his assistant, and a velvet box on her dresser the next day. It was beautiful. It was hollow. She wasn't his wife, not in the way anyone dreamed about. She was a clause, a chess move, a cover story, and she had agreed to it. 2 months ago, she'd been standing in Gregory Wells's private office on the 39th floor of Wells Tech's corporate tower, a room so pristine it made hospitals look lived in. She could still hear the steady hum of the rain on the windows, the sharp click of his pen when he capped it and slid the contract across the table. No warmth, no apology. Just business. Marry me, he said, eyes unreadable. And I'll make sure your brother's name is cleared. She had blinked. Once, twice, waiting for a punchline. He didn't smile. He rarely did. Her stomach had dropped. This is about Julian? Gregory nodded once, slow and measured. He didn't leak the code, but someone wants a scapegoat. And he's perfect. Young, unconnected, replaceable. She had gritted her teeth. He's not replaceable. Gregory didn't argue. Not to you. And that's when she'd understood. This wasn't a man saving her brother out of goodwill. This was strategy, leverage. You do this for Julian? She asked, voice cracking. He shook his head. I do this for myself. Your brother's situation is convenient timing. There was a stillness in the air. Not quiet, still, like the city paused outside the glass just to hear her answer. And in that moment, Brenda felt something inside her split. She didn't argue. She signed. Now, in his penthouse, surrounded by glass and money and silence, she wasn't sure if she'd saved Julian, or just sold herself. Gregory came home late most nights. He'd disappear into his office. She'd hear nothing but the clack of a keyboard, the shuffle of paper. He'd sleep in the guest room, even though the master suite had 2 pillows now. Still, they didn't talk. She wore what his assistant recommended. She smiled at events. She signed the NDA. In public, they were a beautiful couple. Tall, polished, enviable. In private, they were ghosts. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't unkind. He was empty. Brenda had tried, in her own quiet ways, setting a second cup of coffee on the counter, asking about his day. Once, she reached for his hand when a server tripped during a press event. He flinched like she'd burned him. Since then, she hadn't touched him. But she watched how he stared at the piano but never played, watched how he took phone calls standing, like chairs made him restless, watched how he always glanced at the front door twice before walking in, like expecting something, someone, was waiting. They never were. There were no photos in the house, no books, no color. It was like he was trying to live invisibly, and she didn't know why it hurt. He hadn't asked for her heart. He'd offered a deal, but still, every night when he walked in and said nothing, she felt something inside her shrink. Not because she wanted flowers, not because she needed a prince, but because she had never met someone who looked so alive in headlines and so dead in real life. Julian called often, asked if she was okay. She always lied. "I'm fine, Jules, really. Focus on the new dev project. You're doing great." He was doing great. Gregory had made sure of it. Promotions, silence around the leak, clean record. Her brother's future was no longer hanging by a thread. Only hers was. She remembered her dreams once. A small art studio, mornings with music and paint. She used to sketch between shifts when she worked cafe jobs in college. Now she dressed in sleek black, wore heels that clicked too loud in the hallway, and pretended not to be invisible. Gregory never asked about her dreams, never looked at her long enough to see them. But one night, 2 months into their arrangement, everything tilted. It had been raining harder than usual. She stood by the window as always, watching the blur of light and traffic when the elevator pinged. Gregory stepped in, coat soaked, suit clinging to his shoulders. She moved toward the kitchen without a word. He didn't ask where she was going. He never did. But that night, she didn't pour a glass of wine and disappear. She pulled out a saucepan. Bread, herbs, soup, nothing special, but warm, real. He walked past, paused at the smell. She placed the bowl on the counter. "You hadn't eaten." He stood still. Then, "You made this?" Brenda didn't look up. "It's just soup." Gregory stared like it was an artifact, then sat, spoon in hand. Quiet, 1 bite, then 2. He didn't thank her. Not right away, but as she turned to leave, she heard it. "Thank you." And something, small, almost silent, stirred in her chest. Maybe this wasn't over. Maybe this wasn't forever. But maybe it wasn't hopeless either. Brenda didn't bring up the soup the next morning. She didn't ask if he liked it or if it helped. That wasn't the kind of marriage they had. But when she came into the kitchen the next day, there was a small white bag on the counter. Inside was a raspberry croissant from the bakery 4 blocks away, the one she'd mentioned once in passing during a meeting with his assistant. Taped to the bag was a yellow sticky note. "You might like this." No name, no flourish, just his handwriting, sharp and angled. She stared at it for a full minute. He noticed, and he listened. That changed something. Not everything, not loudly, but enough to make her look twice when he walked through the door that night. Enough to notice that he didn't head straight to his office. He lingered in the kitchen a little longer, opened a bottle of wine, didn't pour any, but still, the silence felt different now. Not stiff, just unsure. And Brenda could live with unsure. They settled into a new rhythm. He never touched her. But he didn't flinch when she brushed past him in the hall anymore. He still worked late, but some nights she'd find his jacket slung over the back of the couch instead of hung perfectly in his closet. Once she passed his office and saw him standing at the window, his tie loose, his expression not made of stone. The man in the press was always polished, confident, untouchable. The man she lived with? He was quieter, but not cruel. She didn't ask for more, but she noticed. He watched her cook now, not directly, just from the side of the room, as if unsure if he belonged in the moment. She'd feel his eyes on her when she moved around the kitchen. Once, she caught him watching her hum to an old jazz tune as she stirred something on the stove. She didn't stop, and he didn't look away. A week later, something else changed. Brenda had always been careful about personal items in the penthouse. She didn't want to invade space that wasn't truly hers. But that morning, she left one of her sketchbooks on the breakfast bar. It wasn't intentional. When she returned from a walk, it had been moved, not far, just rotated slightly. When she opened it, a page was creased. She flipped to the drawing. It was one she'd sketched weeks ago. Of a man standing alone, silhouetted by window light. Of Gregory. Not how he looked in the papers, but how he looked the night he stood on the balcony in silence. She closed the book. He'd seen it, and hadn't said a word. But that night, he came home earlier than usual. She didn't ask why. He didn't say. Later that week, she found him sitting on the living room couch, hands still, tie loosened, staring straight ahead. No TV, no music. She hesitated at the doorway. He didn't turn. "I used to draw," he said, voice quiet. Brenda blinked. He didn't continue. But it was more than he'd offered in weeks. She walked slowly toward the other side of the couch and sat down. Not close, not far. "What did you draw?" she asked gently. He paused. Machines, faces, nothing important. "It sounds important." He didn't respond. Silence stretched. Then he added, "My mother used to say drawing was a waste of time." Brenda's chest ached. She looked at him, unsure what to say. So she didn't fill the silence. And somehow, he stayed. Gregory didn't touch her. Not still. But he no longer moved away when she passed him the pepper at dinner. Once, their fingers brushed. She held her breath. He didn't retreat. He stayed. The house began to shift. Subtly. She put out fresh flowers in the kitchen. He didn't remove them. He left a second mug next to the coffee pot in the morning. She used it. They didn't talk about it. But something was changing. A delivery arrived one morning. A large flat box with her name on it. No return address. Inside was a brand new drawing easel, sleek and adjustable, with a hand-written note clipped to the top for when you stop hiding your hands. Gee, she stared at it for 10 seconds, then 30. Her hands did tremble sometimes. She hadn't told him that. She set the easel up by the window that afternoon. And for the first time in months, she picked up a pencil. Julian called again. His voice was lighter than usual. "They promoted me, B," he said, breathless. "And they're flying me to California to speak at a dev conference. Can you believe that?" She smiled through the phone. "Yes. I absolutely can." He paused. "You okay?" She paused, too. "Yeah," she said softly. "I think I am." That night, Gregory came home earlier than usual. He stood by her easel, eyes scanning the half-finished portrait. It was of a woman, eyes focused, hands in motion, lips parted slightly. Not smiling, but not sad. He didn't speak. Then, quietly, "Is that you?" She nodded. "It's strong." She looked at him. "She's tired." He glanced down, but still fighting. Brenda didn't answer. She didn't have to. He stood behind her, close enough to feel. Not touching, but the air between them shifted. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, "about what I made you give up." She blinked. He'd never apologized before. Not once. Brenda turned slowly. "I didn't do it for you," she said, voice level. "I did it for Julian." "I know." Silence. Then he added, "But I didn't give you a real choice. And I regret that." She swallowed. Gregory's jaw tensed. He looked like he wasn't used to regret. Brenda stepped forward. "Just a bit. It's not too late to be someone different." He didn't smile, but he didn't look away. The next morning she woke to the smell of coffee already brewed. A small vase of fresh lavender sat on the kitchen counter. He was gone for a board meeting, but the note was back. "Lavender helps with headaches. I noticed you touched your temple yesterday." She closed her eyes and smiled. The contract still sat in her drawer, still unsigned by a witness, still legal. But she was starting to wonder if she was living with the same man who offered that deal 2 months ago. Because this Gregory, this man who watched, who noticed, who regretted, wasn't stone. He was something else. Something not yet whole, but maybe willing to try. And Brenda didn't need perfect. She just needed real. The rain paused that week. Seattle wasn't exactly known for sun, but the grey gave way to something softer, clouds that didn't threaten, air that didn't bite. Brenda sat on the rooftop terrace for the first time since moving in. A small table and 2 chairs had always been there, barely used. She brought up a cup of mint tea and a sketch pad, not expecting company. But an hour later, she heard the elevator ping behind her. Gregory stepped out, jacket off, tie loose, shirt sleeves rolled up just enough to be unfamiliar. She didn't speak. He didn't retreat. Instead, he walked over, stood a few feet away, and looked at the horizon like it had answers. "I didn't know you used the terrace," he said. She shrugged. "Didn't know I was allowed to." He glanced at her, brow raised. "It's your home too." Brenda tilted her head. "Is it?" Gregory didn't respond right away. But he didn't walk away either. "I'm trying," he said finally. She believed him, but part of her didn't know what he was trying to be. A better man, a better husband, or just less hollow. Later that evening, they had dinner together again. This time, not out of obligation. Brenda made grilled fish and roasted vegetables. Gregory offered to open wine. She saw him studying the label longer than necessary, as if unfamiliar with the gesture. At the table, the silence stretched again. But it wasn't cold, it was cautious. She was careful not to pry. But when she asked how his meeting went, he didn't answer with his usual clipped productive. He said, "Tiring. My CFO talks too much when she's nervous." Brenda smiled faintly. "Do I talk too much?" He looked up, straight at her. "No," he said. "You don't talk enough." That night, she stayed up late sketching. The rooftop view had sparked something in her. She filled pages with shapes, lines, movement. A knock on the open door startled her. Gregory leaned against the frame, hair still damp from a shower. No tie. "You're talented." She blinked. "You're still awake?" "Couldn't sleep." She nodded, expecting him to leave. But he stepped in, quietly, curiously. "Can I see?" She hesitated, then turned the book toward him. He flipped gently, stopped at a page of a faceless man sitting at a grand piano. "You think about that a lot?" he asked. Brenda nodded slowly. "You, at that piano?" Gregory exhaled like someone pressing on an old bruise. She used to say it was weakness, feeling too much. Brenda's chest tightened. "Your mother?" He nodded once. "She hated when I played, said emotion would ruin me, that it made men soft, vulnerable. Do you believe her?" He paused, then looked at her. "No." Brenda's voice was softer than a whisper. "Then why did you stop?" Gregory looked down at his hands. "Because I started to believe she was right." The next evening, something unspoken shifted. Brenda was setting down plates when Gregory walked past the piano. He paused, just for a second. His fingers brushed the edge of the keys. And then he sat, not looking at her, not asking for permission. He just played, softly, slowly, as if testing whether he still remembered how. Brenda stood frozen in the doorway. The notes drifted through the air, hesitant at first, then fuller, warmer. He played like he wasn't sure if he deserved to. She walked closer, silent as breath, and sat on the floor beside the bench, knees pulled to her chest. Gregory didn't stop. He kept playing. It wasn't perfect. He missed a note once, paused too long in a few bars. But it was beautiful, and when it ended, he didn't speak. Neither did she. But when he stood to leave, his fingers lingered on the top of the piano, like saying goodbye to a version of himself he hadn't touched in years. Later, in bed, Brenda couldn't sleep. The apartment was quiet, but not empty. She thought of Gregory's hands, the way they moved, hesitant, but certain, the way he'd looked at the keys like they were mirrors. This wasn't the man she married. This wasn't the man who wrote contracts to buy silence and loyalty. This was someone else, someone still healing. She wasn't sure if she was falling for him, but she was sure she saw him now. And that was something. Days passed like waves. Gregory started coming home earlier. Not always, but often. He didn't hover, but he was present. He started setting the table before dinner. Started checking if they needed groceries. Once, He left a new set of paints on her work table without a note. Brenda noticed every detail, every crack in the wall he'd spent years building. He didn't touch her, but one night, when they watched a documentary in the living room, he fell asleep on the couch beside her, shoulder inches from hers. She didn't move. She didn't need to. Julian called that weekend. He sounded different, lighter, like the kid she remembered before he got swallowed by pressure. "You sound happy," she said. "I am," he replied. "I feel like I belong there now. People actually listen to me." Brenda smiled. "Gregory's changed." "Huh?" She blinked. "Why would you say that?" "I saw him yesterday, at work. He smiled at someone. Like, really smiled." Brenda felt something flutter in her chest. "Maybe we're both changing," she said quietly. Julian laughed. "Maybe it's about time." That night, Brenda cooked her mother's old gumbo recipe. The smell filled the kitchen, spicy and rich. She hummed as she stirred, not noticing Gregory had been standing by the doorway for a while. "You look different when you're in this kitchen," he said. She turned, surprised. Different how? Lighter. She glanced down at her apron. "Maybe gumbo has magic in it." He smiled, small, rare, real, and Brenda felt her breath catch. They ate at the kitchen island, both barefoot, wine in mismatched mugs. And when she laughed at something he said, something small and dry, he looked at her like the sound surprised him. Like maybe he liked it. Later that week, she passed by the piano again. On the lid sat a single envelope, her name on the front, handwritten. Inside, a ticket to the Seattle Art Museum's private showing, and a note. "You said once you hadn't seen real brushwork up close. You should." Gee. She stared at it for minutes. Then she went to find him. He was in his office, reading. She stood in the doorway, held up the envelope. "I didn't say that to be remembered." He looked up. "Then I remembered it anyway." Brenda stepped closer. "Are you always this careful with what people say?" He shook his head once. "No." She stood in front of his desk. "So why with me?" His gaze didn't shift. "Because you're the first person who sees me and doesn't run." She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just nodded and whispered, "Thank you." He stood, closed the folder, and said, "Come with me to the showing." She paused, then replied, "You're asking me?" "Yes." "As your wife?" "No." He stepped closer. "As your date." And in that single moment, measured, simple, sincere, something cracked wide open in both of them. He wasn't cold. He was cautious. And maybe she was willing to wait long enough to show him the difference. The gallery's main wing was hushed. It smelled like varnish and wealth, clean glass, framed canvas, and soft jazz pulsing low beneath the hum of expensive heels. Brenda had only been to one gallery before, back in college, on a student pass. This felt different. He'd brought her here, not as a prop, not as his wife on paper, but as his guest, his date. Gregory stood beside her, one hand in his pocket, gaze fixed on a piece of bold abstract art. Brenda watched his profile more than the canvas. He wasn't restless. He wasn't rushing her. He was here. "I don't understand half of this," he murmured after a long silence. Brenda smiled. "You don't have to. You just have to feel it." He looked at her. "You think I can still feel?" The question wasn't sarcastic. It was honest. She answered without hesitation. "You already are." Gregory didn't look away, and for the first time since their first dinner as strangers, Brenda felt seen. They wandered through the modern art wing next. Brenda's pace slowed in front of a mixed-media painting, a swirl of color, texture, and raw movement. The kind of thing that looked messy at first, then deliberate if you stared long enough. Gregory stood behind her. "I don't like it," he said. "Why?" "It feels unfinished." Brenda tilted her head. "Maybe that's the point." He stepped closer. "You like things that aren't polished?" She glanced sideways at him. "I married you, didn't I?" His breath caught in his throat, and she didn't take it back. That night, they didn't part after the gallery. They didn't walk into separate rooms. They didn't pretend to be pieces in a puzzle someone else designed. Instead, they shared a quiet dinner in the apartment, takeout, eaten straight from the containers. She put on music, Ella Fitzgerald, soft and slow. Gregory didn't retreat to his office. He stayed in the living room. He watched her curl her legs on the couch, sip from a chipped mug she refused to replace. "You're different," he said. "So are you. Do you miss what your life used to be?" She shook her head. "I think this is the first time I'm living it." He said nothing at first. Then, with quiet finality, "Me too." They didn't kiss that night, but when she stood to go to bed, he followed. He didn't sleep on the edge of the bed. He slept facing her, and when her hand brushed his in the dark, he held on. Days blurred into a rhythm, not forced, just real. Brenda painted during the day. Gregory worked, but not always late. He took calls on the terrace. Sometimes he muted them when she walked by. They started eating breakfast together, quiet mornings with shared coffee and folded newspapers. She'd read. He'd watch her without saying much. It was domestic. It was unexpected. And it was something she hadn't believed this arrangement could ever become. One morning, she found a folder on her side of the table. Inside, her name on the deed to a small art studio space just outside Belltown. Brenda blinked. Gregory walked in, shirt half buttoned. "It's yours. For real." "Not through the company." She stared at him. "Why?" He sat across from her. "Because you gave up enough. It's time you got something back." Her voice cracked. "This wasn't part of the deal." "I know." Brenda closed the folder. "You're not who I thought you were." Gregory's eyes softened. "Neither are you. Would you stay if the person you married for survival started changing, for real? Or would you leave before the breakthrough? Tell us in the comments. Share your thoughts, like this video, and subscribe if you believe even the coldest hearts can grow warm again. That weekend, they painted the studio together. Gregory wore an old t-shirt and jeans. Brenda caught herself staring more than once. He looked human, unarmored. He didn't complain when paint splattered on his sneakers. He even dipped a brush into blue and streaked it across her arm. She gasped. "You didn't." His smirk was all boyish mischief. "You needed more color." She lunged back with green. They ended up laughing, barefoot, paint splattered, leaning against the same wall they'd just finished. And in that moment, laughter raw, cheeks flushed. Gregory kissed her, not hesitant, not calculated, real. Brenda responded like her body had been waiting for that moment since the day she signed the contract. No pressure, no pretending, only truth. That night, they made love slowly. No performance, no distance, no blurred obligations, just hands, breath, connection. After, he whispered in the dark, "I don't know how to be good at this." Brenda traced his shoulder with her fingertip. "You don't have to be good. You just have to be honest." He pulled her closer. "I can try," and she believed him, because she wasn't looking for perfection, only presence. In the morning, he made her coffee. Badly. She drank every drop, and he watched her like she was the first piece of art he'd ever understood. The studio smelled like fresh paint and potential. Sunlight poured through the tall windows, casting golden lines across the hardwood floor. Brenda stood in the center, brush in hand, canvas half finished. Her playlist hummed in the background, old soul, the kind her mother used to clean the house to. For once, she didn't feel like she was waiting for something to fall apart. The knock on the open door was light. Gregory leaned in, holding 2 coffees and a white bag. "I wasn't sure if you'd eaten." Brenda smiled. "I got caught up in the colors." He walked in, placed the coffees on the counter, and opened the bag. Inside were her favorite scones, the ones from the corner bakery that always ran out by 9 a.m. "You had to fight for these," she teased. Gregory smirked. "I bribed a cashier." She raised an eyebrow. With a large tip, they ate together, standing, laughing between bites. He wiped a crumb from her lip with his thumb, then paused, his touch lingering. "Your hands aren't shaking anymore," he said. "I'm not scared anymore," she replied. And she meant it. Later that afternoon, she glanced at the calendar pinned on the wall. A note in Julian's handwriting, "Don't forget to call me. I'm getting old," followed by a ridiculous smiley face. Her chest tightened. Gregory. He looked up from his phone. Could Julian come over tonight? He didn't hesitate. Of course. Brenda blinked. Really? Gregory put the phone down. It's his birthday, right? She nodded. He nodded too. I'll make reservations if you'd rather take him out. She stepped forward. I'd rather cook. Gregory smiled slightly. Then I'll be home early. Julian showed up with his usual energy, casual jacket, messy curls, eyes too bright to hide excitement. He hugged Brenda tightly. You look happy. She swatted his arm. I am. He peeked around her shoulder. Is the dragon here? She rolled her eyes. Be nice. Julian grinned. I will. Unless he insults my taste in video games again. Brenda laughed and led him inside. The apartment looked different now. Still minimalist, still glass and stone, but warmer. A blanket draped over the couch. A plant she'd bought last week. The smell of roasted chicken filled the air. Gregory joined them, dressed down in a slate sweater and dark jeans. Julian blinked. You wear clothes like that? Gregory arched an eyebrow. Occasionally. They sat at the dining table, candles lit, soft jazz playing in the background. Brenda served dinner. Julian raved about it. You used to burn toast, he teased. Remember that? Gregory chuckled. It was quiet, but real. Brenda looked up, surprised. Julian's eyes darted between them. Wait, did he just laugh? Gregory didn't deny it. Julian shook his head. You're messing with me. Are we in the twilight zone? Brenda smiled, her heart swelling. Maybe this was what healing looked like. Quiet moments, unexpected laughter, shared meals. After dinner, Julian leaned back in his chair. So, how's the fake marriage going? Brenda stiffened slightly, but Gregory answered before she could. Not so fake anymore. Julian paused, looked at his sister. Brenda nodded once, softly. His face softened. Good. You deserve. Good. She blinked rapidly, brushing something from her eye. Gregory stood, quietly grabbed a box from a side table, and placed it in front of Julian. Julian raised an eyebrow. What's this? A real gift, Gregory said. Not part of any contract. Julian opened the box to find a tablet, top of the line, engraved with his initials. I heard you were writing something of your own, Gregory said. You'll need tools. Julian stared at the gift, stunned, then up at him. Thanks, he said, voice quieter now. Seriously? Gregory nodded. You've earned it. Later, when Julian left, Brenda walked Gregory to the terrace. The city glowed below. He's growing up, she murmured. Gregory folded his arms. You did that. She looked at him. No, you helped. You didn't have to. I know, he said. Then, after a pause, you've given him a kind of love I never understood growing up. The type that stays even when things get hard. Brenda turned toward him. You think you didn't have that? He shook his head. My father measured love by performance. My mother measured it by silence. I learned early how to disappear in a room. Her chest ached. Is that why you stopped playing piano? He looked away. She said the music made me feel too much, that it would make me weak. Brenda reached for his hand, slow, gentle. He didn't flinch. This time, he held on, and the weight of that simple gesture filled the entire rooftop. They went back inside. He didn't let go of her hand. And for the first time since their contract began, Brenda felt like his wife, not just on paper, but in presence. The next morning, she found him sitting at the piano, not playing, just looking at the keys. She didn't speak. She stepped beside him and placed a single flower on the lid, lavender. He looked up at her, then back at the piano, and for the first time in years, he lifted the lid. His fingers hovered, then touched, and he played, softly, hesitantly, but honestly. Brenda sat beside him, not speaking, letting the music speak what words couldn't. Because this wasn't just about healing. This was about choosing someone, even when they were still learning how to be chosen. That night, something settled. Not in the sense of an ending, more like an exhale. The kind that comes after holding your breath too long. Brenda sat on the floor in her studio, legs crossed, pencil in hand. The portrait in front of her wasn't quite finished, Gregory's outline, captured from memory. But this time, he wasn't faceless. He had eyes now. And they weren't cold. They looked like a man who was trying. The door opened behind her. She didn't turn. "You stayed up late," Gregory said, voice low. "Couldn't sleep." She heard the shuffle of his bare feet on hardwood, then the pause. "Is that me?" Brenda smirked without looking up. What gave it away? The brooding jawline. He stepped closer, leaned over her shoulder. "It's not brooding." "It's very brooding," she said, but softer now. Gregory looked at the sketch. "You're good," he murmured. "I used to think I had to be," she said. "Before I gave it up." He didn't answer right away. Then, "Thank you for not giving me up." She turned to him, caught off guard. His eyes didn't flinch. "You didn't know me. You had every reason to hate me, and you still showed up. Even when I didn't." Brenda stood, brushing graphite from her palms. "I stayed for Julian," she said. "At first, I know, but I'm here now. For me." His jaw clenched, not in anger, but in emotion. Restraint. She reached out, fingers brushing the side of his face. "You don't have to say everything," she whispered, "but you're allowed to feel it." He closed his eyes, and for the first time leaned into her palm. They fell into bed that night, not with urgency, but with closeness. Limbs tangled, breaths synced. There was no rush, no heat for the sake of it. Only warmth, only presence. Brenda traced the line of his collarbone. "Do you ever wonder what this could have been if we'd met differently?" Gregory looked up at the ceiling. "All the time." She turned to him. "Would you have even looked at me?" He blinked. "You're the only person I've ever looked at." She smiled. "That sounds rehearsed." "It's not. It's uncomfortable, which means it's real." Brenda laughed, soft and low, and for the first time, she didn't feel like she was surviving him. She felt like she was choosing him. The next day, Gregory did something unexpected. He asked her to come to the office. She hadn't been back since they announced their marriage, since the board meetings and whispers, and all the wide-eyed looks that followed. "You want me there?" she asked, uncertain. Gregory nodded. "There's a team event. Casual. I want you to be seen, not as an accessory, as mine." Brenda's breath hitched. She hadn't expected that word to mean so much, but it did. She wore soft grey, nothing flashy, just her, confident, simple. Gregory walked beside her through the lobby. The staff paused, subtle glances cast in their direction. Most of them had only seen the wedding photo, the brief press interview. Now, they saw her with him, not behind, not 2 steps away. Gregory placed his hand gently at the small of her back as they walked into the team room. It wasn't a possessive gesture. It was anchoring, quietly reassuring. Julian was there, mid-conversation with 2 younger developers. He grinned the second he spotted her. "B, you came." She hugged him, smiling. "Wouldn't miss it." Gregory stayed a few feet back, watching her laugh, watching her ease into the space. Later, as she passed by his office, she paused at the doorway. "You sure you're ready for them to see you like this?" she teased. Gregory leaned against the frame. "What, like a man who got lucky?" She laughed. "You don't do jokes." "I'm evolving." He stepped forward. "You make this place better." Brenda blinked. "I haven't been here in months." "You've changed the way I move in it," he said. "That's more than enough." That evening, they sat on the rooftop, overlooking the city. Gregory handed her a folded paper, handwritten. Brenda opened it. Inside was a poem, not long, not perfect, but his. She looked up at him. "You wrote this?" He nodded, slightly embarrassed. "I haven't written anything since college." And even then, "It's beautiful," she said. "It's Messy. She smiled. That's why it's beautiful. He leaned over, kissed her forehead, and for the first time she realized she hadn't just softened his walls. He'd let her inside them. And now they were building something that didn't need fixing, only nurturing. The next morning she found one last surprise. On her easel sat a fresh canvas. Taped to it was a simple note: paint whatever feels like peace. I'll be in the kitchen, learning how to make toast without burning it. She laughed out loud, and it echoed in the apartment that used to hold nothing but silence. The mornings had changed, not in grand, cinematic ways, but in the smallest ones, the kinds that tell you everything without needing to say it. Gregory now waited for her to wake up before starting the coffee. Not because he needed her to do it, but because he liked the quiet moment of pouring hers first, then asking how she slept. Brenda no longer rushed out of bed either. She'd linger in the sheets a bit longer, especially when his arm was already around her waist. And sometimes they just stayed in bed. No words, just warmth. The rhythm was theirs now, not dictated by contracts, appearances, or obligations. It was real. Brenda stood in the studio with a canvas half-painted, skyline at dusk, soft pinks and deep navy. She'd added a balcony railing in charcoal, rough and imperfect, the kind of imperfection she used to hate. Now she loved it. Gregory walked in with 2 mugs. She grinned. You didn't burn the toast this time. I'm growing. You're getting cocky. He smirked. I learned from the best. He set the coffee down and moved beside her. You always draw from the same window, he said. I guess I like the view. You think you'll ever paint something different? Brenda looked up at him. I already am. That evening, they cooked together. Gregory didn't just stand and watch. He chopped, carefully, slowly, but with real effort. She leaned over and touched his hand gently. You're getting better. He looked at her. I want to be. The meal was simple: pasta, roasted tomatoes, soft garlic bread. They ate at the island with candles flickering between them. No phones, no work, just connection. Afterward, Brenda pulled out an old photo album she'd found buried in a moving box. Childhood pictures, her and Julian in matching pajamas, her mom in rollers, smiling behind a burnt pie. Gregory watched her flip through each page. You miss them? He asked. She nodded. Every day. But I like knowing they'd be proud of me now. He hesitated. Do you think they'd approve of us? Brenda tilted her head. The man you were when I married you? No. He nodded. But the man sitting next to me now? She said. Absolutely. He didn't look away. I'm not finished changing. I don't need finished, she whispered. I just need honest. They curled up on the couch later, watching an old comedy with bad lighting and worse jokes. Gregory laughed. Short, surprised, like he hadn't expected to. Brenda glanced at him. You laugh more now. He raised an eyebrow. That bad? No, she said, settling against his shoulder. That human. He stayed quiet, but his arm tightened around her. The next day, Gregory surprised her with something new. She'd come home from a solo gallery visit to find him in the kitchen, apron on, covered in flour. What happened to you? She asked, biting back a laugh. I tried to bake bread. You tried. He held up a lopsided, slightly burned loaf. It has texture. Brenda stepped closer, smiling. You made this for me? I made it for us. She took a bite, paused. He winced. Is it that bad? She shook her head. It's perfect. Because it wasn't about bread. It was about effort. And love, she was learning, looked like flour on the floor more often than roses on a table. Julian stopped by the following weekend. He walked in, took one look at Gregory in socks and a faded t-shirt, and grinned. Well, well, Julian said. You're domesticated. Gregory didn't miss a beat. I'm learning how to be human. Julian turned to Brenda. He's not even pretending to be scary anymore. Brenda nudged him. Don't ruin the progress. Julian laughed. I like this version. They all ate together, easy and relaxed. Julian teased them. Gregory took it. even teased back once. Brenda couldn't stop smiling. After Julian left, she turned to Gregory. "You know you don't have to prove anything to him, right?" Gregory nodded. "I'm not doing it for him." Then he looked at her. "I'm doing it for you." That night, as she read in bed, Gregory came in holding a closed box. "What's this?" He handed it to her. No words. She opened it slowly. Inside was a brand new sketchbook. The cover was custom, black leather with a gold-embossed title, "The Life You're Building." She looked up at him, overwhelmed. "I figured we should stop living around what hurt us," he said, "and start creating what heals us." Brenda stood and wrapped her arms around his neck. "I think I already have." He kissed her forehead, her cheek, then finally her lips, slow, lingering. And it didn't feel like a milestone. It felt like home. That weekend, Gregory asked a question she didn't expect. "Would you ever want to leave the city?" They were curled up on the couch, the fire crackling. Brenda raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "Not now," he said. "Maybe one day, when the world isn't so loud." She smiled. "Where would we go?" "Somewhere with open skies, quiet mornings, maybe chickens." She laughed. "You? With chickens?" "I'd make a good chicken dad," he deadpanned. Brenda laughed until tears formed. And Gregory watched her, like joy itself was a painting he didn't want to stop studying. A few days later, Gregory invited her to an internal strategy dinner. Not a formal gala, not the kind with cameras and scripted speeches, just key executives, a private chef, and a round table in a quiet rooftop lounge. He asked if she'd join him, not as an accessory, but as his wife. "I don't want you in the background anymore," he said as she chose earrings in the mirror. "I never wanted the spotlight," Brenda replied. "I don't care about the spotlight," he said. "I just want you where you belong, beside me." That night, she wore navy silk, simple lines, natural curls pinned loosely. Gregory offered her his arm in the hallway, and when they stepped into the room, conversations paused for a second too long. Most had never seen him smile. Now he did, with ease. He introduced her not as my wife or Brenda, but as the person who reminds me to breathe. She blinked when he said it. He didn't flinch. He meant it. They sat together through courses of quiet conversation. Brenda said little at first, then more when someone brought up gallery funding. Gregory watched her talk about art, about community healing through creativity. His hand rested lightly on the back of her chair, steady, constant. After dessert, one of the execs leaned over and said, "It's good to see him alive." Brenda blinked. "What do you mean?" "Gregory's brilliant," the man said, "but most of us assumed he'd chosen isolation permanently." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Gregory had chosen her instead. Afterward, in the car, he reached for her hand. His grip was firm but not tight. She looked out at the city lights and whispered, "Do you know how far you've come?" He exhaled. "Some days, I still feel like I'm pretending." Brenda turned to him. "You're not pretending. You're practicing." He smiled. "With you, it feels easier." She squeezed his fingers. "That's all love is, practicing with someone who lets you be human." The next morning, she woke to an unfamiliar sound. Music. The piano. She wrapped herself in a robe and walked into the living room. Gregory sat at the keys, bare feet, hair messy from sleep. He didn't stop when she entered. The melody was soft, unfinished. He made mistakes, doubled back, adjusted. He wasn't trying to impress her. He was playing because it grounded him. Brenda sat on the floor beside the bench, head resting against his knee. His hand left the keys for a moment and found her hair, gently threading his fingers through it as he kept playing with the other. Neither of them spoke. There was no need. That afternoon, Gregory surprised her again. They drove north, just an hour from the city. No explanation. Brenda trusted him. When they arrived, she stepped out into a quiet field dotted with wildflowers and overlooking a small lake. A wooden sign by the entrance read, "The Hollow." "What is this place?" she asked. Gregory smiled. "It used to belong to a friend's family. I asked to lease it long-term. She raised a brow. Why? He looked around. Because sometimes healing needs space. Brenda walked the perimeter, the breeze kissing her skin. It was quiet, unfinished, beautiful. I want to restore it, Gregory said, piece by piece, slowly. With you? Brenda turned back to him, eyes soft. You're serious? He nodded. This city will always matter, but someday, this could be our peace. Her throat tightened. Would you come here? He asked. With me? She didn't answer right away. She simply walked toward him, wrapped her arms around his middle, and whispered into his chest, anywhere. The following week, Brenda hosted a small gallery night at her studio. Not for profit, not for prestige, just a handful of friends, Julian, 2 local artists, and a few curious strangers. Gregory stood at the back most of the night, watching her glow as she spoke about process, meaning, and memory. She had purpose in her eyes, color in her hands. At the end of the night, he walked up to one of her newer paintings, a bold, striking blend of greys and ochres. This one's different, he said. She joined him. It's called Unspoken. He nodded slowly. It feels like me. Brenda smiled. It is. They walked home that night hand in hand, not as husband and wife who signed a deal, but as 2 people who'd decided that healing was worth the slow, messy work. He turned to her at the corner. Sometimes I think I'm still him, he said quietly. The version of me who was cold, controlling, absent. Brenda shook her head. He's gone. You buried him every time you chose kindness. Gregory's voice broke slightly. Then I'm going to keep choosing. Brenda stopped walking, faced him. You already are. She leaned up and kissed him like he was the safest thing she'd ever known. Later that week, they curled up in bed. Brenda traced her finger along the length of his collarbone. He caught her hand mid-trace and kissed her knuckles. I wish I could give you back those first 2 months, he whispered. You deserved so much more. Brenda shook her head. Those 2 months are why this means something now. He pulled her closer. I still want to earn it. She smiled. You already have. He fell asleep first. Brenda watched him breathe, steady and open. Then she got up, walked to her studio and opened her new sketchbook, the one he'd given her. On the first page, she drew him. Not as the CEO, not even as her husband, but as her safe place. And beneath it, in her handwriting, she wrote, We are not what broke us. We are what we build after. Brenda stood by the window of the penthouse again, but it wasn't the same view as before. The rain still fell. The streets still glowed in ribbons of red and gold. But the silence behind her didn't feel sharp anymore. It felt full, soft, lived in. She wasn't waiting for something to change. It already had. Behind her, Gregory was in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, leaning over the recipe card she'd written out by hand. He didn't ask for help. He wanted to try on his own. And that, more than anything, made her smile. The man who once said nothing unless necessary now asked questions like, Is this garlic enough? And do you think this needs more lemon? And her answers weren't judged. They were trusted. That night, he made lemon chicken with rice and roasted greens. Slightly overcooked, slightly too much salt. But he beamed when she took her first bite and said, You're officially dangerous now. He laughed. Really laughed. It echoed through the apartment like warmth, and it landed right in her chest. Later, after dinner, they curled up in the reading nook by the fireplace. Gregory tucked his feet under the blanket, a book in his lap, while Brenda worked on a piece from her upcoming show. She painted in silence, but he didn't try to fill it. Instead, he asked a question she hadn't expected. Do you still think about how this started? She looked up. He wasn't defensive. He was reflective. I do, she said, but not with regret. He watched her. I thought I was sacrificing my life, she continued, but maybe I was just redirecting it. He nodded slowly. I thought I was buying convenience, he said, but I ended up standing across from someone who made me face everything I tried to bury. Brenda set her brush down. Are you glad? He didn't hesitate. Yes, Are you? She didn't answer with words. She leaned across the space and kissed him, soft, steady, sure. The following morning, Brenda got a call from the gallery. Her upcoming show had a waiting list. Someone had anonymously sponsored half the event. She knew exactly who. She walked into the kitchen where Gregory was slicing strawberries. "You're very sneaky," she said. He didn't look up. "I'm not denying anything." She leaned over and kissed his cheek. "Next time, leave your name." "You deserve the credit." He turned to her. "I already have it." Brenda's heart swelled. She wasn't used to being loved out loud. Now it was becoming normal. Later that week, she woke with a headache and body chills. Gregory noticed before she said anything. He wrapped her in a blanket, cancelled his meetings, and spent the day keeping her company on the couch. When she tried to apologize, he shushed her. "You took care of me in silence when I didn't know how to ask," he said. "This is nothing." He made her soup from a boxed mix. It tasted awful. She ate every spoonful, because it tasted like effort. That evening, as she lay in his lap, half asleep, he whispered something she barely caught. "I've never cared for someone this much." Brenda opened her eyes. She didn't speak. She just reached up and laced her fingers with his. The next day, she was better. But something shifted in him. Gregory became more present. He joined her during painting breaks. He started putting music on in the evenings. Not loud, but enough to fill the background. Jazz, soft blues, old vinyl classics she hadn't heard in years. They danced once in the kitchen, barefoot, offbeat, but together. She stepped on his foot and burst out laughing. He groaned, overdramatic, then dipped her backward. "Forgiven?" he teased. She looked up at him. Always. One morning, he stood at the window with a mug in his hand and said, "You know what I wish?" Brenda, still in her robe, sat cross-legged on the floor. "What?" "That we had started like this. No contracts, no damage." She rose and walked to him, slipped her arms around his waist. "If we had, you wouldn't have needed me." He looked down at her. "I still would have wanted you." She leaned her head on his chest. "And I'd still say yes." That night, they talked about what they wanted next. Not big, sweeping life changes, just small things. A road trip, a second dog, a garden on the terrace, maybe a weekend in the mountains. "Peace is earned," Gregory said. "And kept," Brenda added. They clinked wine glasses and toasted to tomorrow. The next morning, a call came in from HR, not about Julian, but about something else. Gregory took it in his office. Brenda watched him from the doorway. He looked different now when stressed, more composed, more centered. When he hung up, he turned to her. "They want me to do a company-wide fireside talk," he said, "about leadership, relationships, balance." Brenda smiled. "They want you to be a person, not just a position." He ran a hand through his hair. "What would I even say?" "Tell them the truth," she said, "that the person behind the job matters more than the image." He paused, then nodded. "Will you be there?" he asked. Brenda stepped into the room. Always. That night, she painted a scene from memory. Gregory sitting at the piano, but not alone this time. Her figure beside his. One bench, two hearts. The fireside talk was held on a Thursday evening, live-streamed from Wells Tech's top-floor auditorium. Not formal. No suits. No teleprompters. Just Gregory in a charcoal sweater, sitting in a high-backed chair with a soft floor lamp behind him. Brenda sat in the front row, next to Julian, who had volunteered to handle the tech setup. Her hands were clasped, resting in her lap, but her eyes didn't waver from the man on stage. Gregory cleared his throat once, then looked into the small sea of employees and into the camera. "I've been asked to talk about leadership," he said. "And if you'd asked me a year ago, I'd have given you a chart, a performance report, maybe a checklist." He paused. "But none of those things ever made anyone feel safe. They just made me feel in control." Brenda felt her breath catch. This wasn't rehearsed. Gregory continued, "The truth is, I didn't know how to lead people, because I didn't know how to be with people. I thought being untouchable was the same as being respected. That silence was strength. He looked around the room. It took me marrying someone who saw right through me to realize I wasn't strong. I was just unavailable. Julian glanced at Brenda, stunned. Gregory went on. What I've learned over the last few months is this. People don't follow perfection. They follow honesty. They trust the leader who shows up with flaws, with humility, with room to grow. He paused, voice quieter now. Some of you have asked me why I've changed. The answer's simple. I fell in love with someone who reminded me that growth doesn't happen behind walls. Gregory looked directly at Brenda. It happens when you open the door and invite someone in. Silence. Then soft applause. Then more. Not loud. Not forced. Just genuine. Brenda's eyes welled. She didn't stand or wave or smile for attention. She just looked at him and nodded. After the talk, several employees approached Gregory, some to thank him, others just to shake his hand. One woman said, "That made me call my husband just now. I haven't done that midday in months." Gregory nodded, humbly. "I hope it leads to something better." Brenda stayed off to the side until the crowd thinned. Then he walked over to her, still looking like the man she first met, but now filled with someone entirely new. "Well?" he asked. She reached up and adjusted the collar of his sweater. "You told the truth," she said. Gregory exhaled. That was scarier than a board meeting. She smiled. "That's because it mattered." They walked out of the building together. No cars, no entourage. Just hand in hand down a quiet city street. "You think they'll take me seriously after that?" he asked. Brenda looked over. "I think they'll follow you more now than they ever did." He stopped walking, pulled her gently toward him. "I don't want to be followed," he said. "I want to be loved by you for a long, long time." Her heart fluttered. "You already are." That weekend, Brenda hosted a brunch in the studio. Not a formal event, just Julian, a couple artist friends, one or two of Gregory's employees who'd become mutual acquaintances. Gregory brought the pastries. Brenda nearly fainted when she saw they weren't burned. "You had help," she accused playfully. "Maybe," he said, brushing flour off his jacket. They played music, sipped orange juice, laughed over nothing. At one point, Brenda stepped out onto the studio balcony to clear her head. Gregory followed. "You good?" he asked. She nodded. "Just needed a breath." He stood beside her. "You've made something beautiful here." She looked at the small studio space. Easels, mismatched chairs, the scent of paint and cinnamon. "Yeah," she said, "but I didn't do it alone." He slid his arm around her waist. "That's the best part." That night, they danced again in the kitchen. No music this time. Just the hum of the dishwasher and the rhythm of their feet. It wasn't choreographed. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. Gregory leaned down and whispered in her ear, "I don't know how I lived before this." Brenda pressed her cheek to his chest. "You didn't." One afternoon a week later, they visited the property he'd leased outside the city, the Hollow. It had been cleared, cleaned, the old barn foundation strengthened. Gregory held her hand as they walked the uneven ground. Brenda stopped by a maple tree, then turned toward the sun. This would be a good spot for a garden. Gregory nodded. "And maybe a deck. With a long table," she added. "For all the people who'll become family," he said. She looked at him. "You've thought about this." "I've thought about everything." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Brenda opened it. It was a sketch. A house. Their house. Windows wide open. A porch swing. 2 chairs. Underneath, Gregory had written, "No walls." Her chest tightened. "I can't promise the timing," he said, "or how it will all go. But I can promise I'll build this with you. Every corner, every beam, every morning that starts with tea and ends with peace." Brenda folded the paper, looked up at him. "You already started." That night, back at the penthouse, Gregory lit the fireplace. They lay curled together under the same blanket they used to sit apart beneath. Brenda looked into the flames and whispered, Do you ever think about the contract? Gregory shook his head. I think about the moment it stopped being useful, he said. Which, for me, was the day you made soup for someone who didn't know how to ask for care. She closed her eyes. I still have it, she said. The soup. She laughed softly. The contract. He smiled. Burn it. Brenda looked at him. Really? He nodded. It never had anything worth keeping. She rose from the couch, went into the office, pulled open the drawer. The envelope was still sealed. She brought it back to him, handed it over. Gregory opened it, pulled out the thin papers. He didn't read them. He simply stood, walked to the fireplace, and let the flame take them. They watched in silence as the paper curled and disappeared. And when it was done, Brenda leaned against his side. He looked down at her. No more terms, he said. Only trust. She reached up and kissed him. No more pretending, she said. Only love. Do you believe people can grow into the kind of love they never thought they deserved? If this story speaks to you, hit like, share it with someone who needs hope, and tell us in the comments what part of Brenda and Gregory's journey moved you most. They slept that night, wrapped in peace. No lingering fears, no secret hesitations, just two people, once strangers in name, now family in every sense. And as the rain tapped softly against the windows, Brenda whispered before sleep took her. I don't miss the before. Gregory pulled her closer. Me neither. 1 month later, the penthouse stood empty. The sun spilled through the towering windows like it always had, but there were no paintbrushes. By the counter, no dishes left to soak, no vinyls spinning in the background. Everything had been packed. The final box sat by the elevator, sealed and labeled, Studio Supplies. Fragile. Brenda walked through the apartment slowly, barefoot, her fingers brushing the walls as she passed. Each room echoed with memories now, quiet dinners, clumsy dancing, slow mornings. But it was time. They were moving forward. She looked up as Gregory stepped out from the bedroom, hair tousled, shirt untucked, a small smile playing on his face. Ready? He asked. She took a breath. Yeah. He picked up the box and nodded toward the elevator. Let's go home. The townhouse sat just 4 blocks from the hospital where Brenda once volunteered. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't grand. But it had a red door, a wraparound porch, and sunlight in every room. It felt like the life they were choosing, not the one they'd built out of survival. Brenda stepped inside and exhaled. Fresh paint, exposed beams, hardwood floors warm beneath her toes. The windows let in afternoon light, like the space had been waiting for them. She turned to Gregory. I didn't think you'd go for cozy. He shrugged. Turns out, I like mornings where you can hear the birds, and doors that don't echo when they close. He set the box down. Plus, it's close enough to the studio. And your brother. And your office, she added. He grinned. Only if I still go in. She narrowed her eyes. You're not quitting. No, he said. But I'm rebalancing. She smiled. Good. They spent that first weekend unpacking. Slowly. No rush. No pressure. Brenda placed plants by the windows, hung her favorite print over the fireplace. Gregory took over the kitchen, organizing spices alphabetically, labeling dry goods, and insisting they install better lighting. By Sunday evening, it looked lived in. They sat on the porch steps with wine in mismatched mugs, watching the sky melt into shades of orange and violet. Gregory leaned back on his hands. I never imagined this life. Brenda glanced at him. Because you didn't think you could have it? He looked at her. No. Because I didn't think I deserved it. She reached over and took his hand. You do now. He squeezed gently. Because of you. No, she said. Because of you. Their days settled into something quiet and whole. Mornings began with coffee and music, usually Nina Simone or Miles Davis. Brenda painted in the early light, barefoot in the kitchen nook Gregory had converted into her corner studio. He worked from the home office but often came to check on her, bringing a snack, asking her to look at a new design layout, or just standing behind her with his chin resting on her shoulder. Julian visited every Sunday with stories from the office, a bag of bagels, and a new theory about life that made Brenda laugh until her stomach hurt. One weekend, he brought a girl. Gregory didn't say anything at first, but later, while doing dishes, he murmured, "He's in love." Brenda smiled. "You can tell." Gregory nodded. "He looks at her the way I used to look at the door." She raised a brow. "The door?" He dried his hands. "Waiting for you to come through it." Brenda leaned against the counter, heart full. "You're not waiting anymore." "No," he said. "Now I'm building something with you inside it." One night, the power went out during a thunderstorm. Instead of panicking, they lit candles, pulled out an old deck of cards, and played on the floor like teenagers. Brenda won most of the hands. Gregory insisted she was cheating. She laughed so hard she cried. Afterward, they lay on the rug, heads close, hands linked. "Do you ever miss the chaos?" he asked. She thought for a moment. "No. I miss the clarity it forced." He turned to face her. "Explain." "When everything was falling apart, I knew exactly what I wanted. Peace. Safety. You, once I realized who you really were, now we have it. And I just don't want to lose that clarity." Gregory nodded slowly. "Then we'll protect it." Every day. The next morning, he made breakfast. Real breakfast. Scrambled eggs, toast, fruit, coffee. She walked in wearing his shirt, hair messy, face still soft from sleep. He looked up, stunned for a second. Then, "You look like forever." Brenda blinked. "Too much?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, just right." They ate by the window. The rain tapped gently on the glass. Outside, the street was quiet, the trees swaying in a rhythm that felt like a lullaby. After they finished, he cleared the plates, kissed her forehead and said, "Go paint." She didn't argue. She picked up her brush and created something new. That evening, they lay on the couch in matching sweatshirts, her feet tucked under his thigh, watching a documentary. Gregory paused it mid-sentence. Brenda looked at him. "What?" "I've been thinking," he said. "Oh no." He smirked. "Shut up." She grinned. "Okay. What's on your mind?" He sat up a little straighter. "I want to remarry you." Brenda froze. "What?" "I mean for real. Not as a deal, not as a fix, not with a lawyer, just us, quietly, somewhere small, maybe here in the yard, or by the water." She stared at him. He kept talking. "You don't have to wear white. There doesn't need to be vows we memorize. But I want to say it again. I want to choose you out loud." Brenda's throat closed. She didn't speak. She simply moved into his lap, straddled him gently, and wrapped her arms around his neck. "I'd marry you 1,000 times, she whispered. He held her. And neither of them moved. That night, she added one final line to the painting she'd been working on for weeks. 2 silhouettes. A red door behind them. The sky above them unfinished. But together, she titled it, "Start Again." They picked a Sunday morning. No guests. No cameras. No formal setup. Just them, standing barefoot in the backyard of their new townhouse. The soft grass still damp from a light drizzle the night before. A patch of sunlight broke through the clouds, landing right where they stood, like even the sky decided to be kind that day. Brenda wore a pale blue dress that moved like quiet water when she breathed. Gregory wore a white shirt with the sleeves rolled, the top button undone, his expression soft but steady. Julian stood a few feet away holding a mug of coffee and wiping his eyes with his sleeve like he wasn't crying. They didn't use vows from the internet. They didn't read anything rehearsed. Gregory took Brenda's hands and spoke first. "You walked into my life when I thought walls were safer than windows. I never meant to let anyone in, but you never forced your way through. You waited at the edge until I chose to open the door." He paused, voice catching. "And now I want every day to be a door we walk through together." Brenda's eyes were wet, but she didn't break. "You were never cold," she said. "You were scared. I know what that feels like, but now you're brave. And that's the version of you I get to love." They didn't exchange rings. The old ones stayed, because they no longer represented a contract. They meant something new now. A beginning. They kissed softly, no applause, no dramatic flair, just breath shared and promises made in silence. Julian cleared his throat loudly. "Okay, well, I'm gonna need 10 tissues and a nap." They all laughed. Later, inside, they made breakfast together. Pancakes, eggs, black coffee. Julian hung around, teasing Gregory about burning toast again. "Don't forget I know your past," he said, pointing a fork. "You used to microwave eggs." Gregory raised a brow. "And you used to wear dinosaur pajamas to school." Brenda choked on her juice, laughing. The house rang with something new: ease, family, belonging. That afternoon, they sat on the porch swing together, the kind Gregory had added 2 weeks before, without saying a word. Brenda leaned into his side, her head resting on his shoulder. "You really never wanted this?" she asked softly. "I never thought it was possible," he replied. She looked up at him. "And now?" He kissed the top of her head. "Now I can't imagine anything else." They created routines quickly. Monday mornings meant shared calendars and grocery lists. Wednesday nights became pasta nights, Gregory's self-proclaimed experimental sauce sessions, which Brenda both feared and secretly loved. Fridays were for painting together, not side by side, but together. He sat and watched, asked questions, sometimes sketched alongside her, messy, unsure lines, but he did it. He tried, and in that trying, she found herself falling again, not in the dramatic, swept off her feet kind of way, but in the quiet, intentional way, the kind that built futures. One night, while watching an old romance movie, Brenda turned to him. "Do you think we're too ordinary now?" Gregory looked over. "What do you mean? Things used to feel dramatic, intense. Now it's soft." He reached for her hand. "I think softness is the reward." She smiled. "I think you're right." Weeks passed. The gallery show came and went, packed, praised, even reviewed by a local paper that called her collection emotionally seismic. Gregory bought one of the pieces anonymously, the one titled "Start Again." When Brenda discovered it missing from the studio, he didn't deny it. "I want it in the house," he said. "I want to be reminded that this didn't happen by accident. It happened because we worked for it." One evening, while walking through a nearby park, Brenda paused at the playground fence. A little girl was laughing on a swing. Her father pushed her gently, both of them glowing with something unspoken. Gregory followed her gaze. They stood in silence for a while. Then Brenda said, "Do you ever wonder what kind of parents we'd be?" He didn't answer right away. "I wonder," he said finally. "But I also worry." She turned to him. "That I'd get it wrong," he explained. "That I'd repeat things I promised I'd never become." Brenda slipped her hand into his. "You wouldn't." "How can you be sure?" "Because you already broke the cycle. You lead with softness now." Gregory looked back toward the little girl. "I want it," he said. "A family. Not tomorrow. But when we're ready." Brenda squeezed his hand. "So do I." Back home that night, she lit candles around the tub. He ran the water. They soaked in silence, bodies tangled under warm suds. "Do you feel like we're complete now?" she asked. Gregory kissed her shoulder. "I feel like we're beginning again, but this time with nothing between us." Brenda closed her eyes and whispered, "Finally." Later that week, Julian dropped by. He stood awkwardly in the kitchen, holding a small wrapped box. "This is for you," he said. Brenda raised an eyebrow. "What's the occasion?" Julian shrugged. "No occasion. Just, I was thinking about the way everything changed." Gregory stepped in, curious. "What is it?" Brenda unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a framed photo. One of the first taken at the new townhouse. Gregory, Brenda, and Julian on the front steps. Brenda mid-laugh, Julian grinning. Gregory smiling, not posing. Just being. On the frame were 3 words engraved into the wood. "No more pretending." Brenda's throat tightened. Julian rubbed the back of his neck. "I figured we all earned that." Gregory stepped forward and took the frame. "We did." He placed it on the kitchen counter, right where they'd see it every morning. That night, in bed, Brenda rolled over and whispered, "Tell me something you've never told anyone." Gregory thought for a moment. "I used to think love was a performance." She blinked. "Why?" "Because no one ever showed me love as presence, only as pressure. But then you walked in, and never asked me to be anything I wasn't ready to become. You just stayed." Brenda reached out, fingers against his cheek. "I stayed because I saw you, not who you pretended to be, but the man underneath. And now, she said, I get to fall for the man who stopped hiding." Gregory smiled. A full one. And in that smile, Brenda saw not the man who'd once offered her a contract, but the man who now chose her every single day. The mornings came earlier now, not because of alarms or meetings, but because Brenda and Gregory found themselves waking before the sun, just to sit on the porch swing together, hands wrapped around coffee mugs, feet bare, words unnecessary. It had been 6 months since they left the penthouse, 6 months since the contract burned in their fireplace. And yet, Brenda still caught herself checking the drawer sometimes, as if a small part of her needed reassurance that it was really gone. She never found it, and that absence felt like freedom. Gregory stood in the backyard that morning, a rake in hand, sleeves rolled up. He looked completely at ease, like this life had always belonged to him. Brenda leaned on the doorframe, watching. "You know," she called out, "you're starting to look suspiciously like someone who knows what he's doing." He looked back at her with a grin. Fake it long enough, it becomes muscle memory. She walked down the steps, her robe catching the breeze. "You ever miss it? The boardroom?" She nodded. Gregory leaned on the rake. "Sometimes. The structure, the certainty, but not the man I had to be to survive there." Brenda stepped closer, wrapping her arms around his waist. "You didn't survive. You endured." He kissed her forehead. "And then you walked in." That afternoon, while organizing old sketchbooks, Brenda found something she hadn't seen since the move, the original copy of the marriage contract. Unburned, untouched. She frowned, flipping through it. Her signature was still at the bottom, so was his, but the date caught her off guard. She walked into Gregory's office, holding the pages loosely. "You said you burned it." Gregory looked up from his laptop. "I did." She held up the contract. "Then what's this?" He stood slowly, stepped around the desk, took it from her hands. "This is a copy," he said quietly. "The original was destroyed the night I asked you to choose me, but I kept this one, because I needed a reminder." Brenda studied his face. "Of what?" He met her eyes. "Of who I was before you, taught me how to feel." She didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "Do you still need it?" He looked down at the paper, then back at her. "No." And this time, without hesitation, he tore the pages in half, then again, until all that remained was silence and paper scattered across the desk. He pulled her into his arms and whispered, "You're my only agreement now." That night, they made love slowly, not as a ritual, not as a symbol, just because they could, because trust lived in their hands now, because love didn't need to prove itself anymore. The following week, Gregory got a call from a publishing house. A friend had passed along one of his essays, the one he wrote after the fireside talk. The editor wanted to include it in a collection called Modern Men, Stories of Growth and Grace. Gregory laughed when he told Brenda. "Me? Grace?" She placed a kiss on his collarbone. "You've become the story people need to hear." He nodded slowly. "I just didn't think I had a story worth telling." Brenda leaned into his chest. "You became worth listening to the moment you stopped performing." He accepted the offer. They celebrated with red wine and a quiet night on the floor, surrounded by candles. Brenda traced her finger across the top of his hand. "You're leaving something behind now," she said. Gregory looked at her. "A legacy. A lesson," she corrected. "The people aren't what they start as. They're what they choose to become." He kissed her softly. "Then I choose to keep becoming yours." A few days later, Julian came over with updates from the office and an envelope. "It's from HR," he said, handing it to Gregory. "Final record review. They cleared everything. Said they're closing the Julian Holt case permanently." Brenda exhaled. Finally, Gregory scanned the document, then handed it to her. "Keep it," he said. "Proof that you were always worth fighting for." Julian smirked. "I owe you both everything." Brenda shook her head. "You owe us dinner." They laughed, and when Julian left that night, Gregory turned to her in the hallway. "That contract," he murmured. "It may have started as a transaction, but it ended as a transformation." Brenda smiled. "Of both of us." That weekend, they sat in their studio reading comments from Gregory's published essay. Most were supportive. Some were deeply personal. One read, "I gave my marriage another chance because of this." Another, "I didn't know men like this existed. Thank you for making me believe again." Brenda read them aloud, while Gregory listened. When she finished, he reached for her hand. "I thought my value was in being untouchable," he said. "You were wrong. I'm glad I was." That night, Brenda lit the fireplace again. They sat on the rug, tangled in blankets. She reached behind the couch and pulled out a wrapped package. Gregory raised an eyebrow. "What's this?" "Just open it." He peeled back the paper slowly. Inside was a hardcover journal. On the front, gold lettering read, "What We Built." He opened it. The first page held her handwriting. A single sentence. "Love is the quiet decision to keep showing up." He looked at her, moved. "You still write things like this?" She smiled. "For you, I always will." He pulled her into his arms, and in that moment, no storm, no contract, no past version of themselves remained. Only peace, only present, only love. Brenda had never seen Gregory at peace until that Sunday. It started with eggs and jazz on the speaker. She danced barefoot in the kitchen while he watched from the entryway, arms folded, pretending not to smile. "You're staring," she teased. "I'm memorizing." Brenda turned down the stove. "You always say things like that when you want me flustered." He stepped closer. "Is it working?" She couldn't help the flush on her cheeks. "Maybe." Later that afternoon, they went for a walk through the local botanical gardens. Gregory used to avoid public displays of affection, but now he held her hand openly, even pulling her closer when someone recognized him. They stopped by the koi pond. Brenda leaned over the railing, watching the fish. Gregory stood behind her. "I used to come here as a teenager, alone." Brenda turned. "Why?" "To feel something, the colors, the stillness. It reminded me life wasn't supposed to be sharp all the time." She reached for his hand. "And now?" He looked at her. "Now, I come here and feel full." Brenda smiled. "Then we're doing something right." They returned home that evening to find a package on the doorstep. No name, no sender. Inside was a leather-bound photo album. Gregory opened it carefully, eyes narrowing as he flipped through the pages. Each photo was of his parents, formal dinners, stiff smiles. Then, a few pictures of him, barely 5, looking painfully small in rooms too large. At the end was a letter. Brenda read it aloud. "If you're reading this, it means I never said the words when I should have. I was hard on you, Gregory, not because I didn't love you, but because I didn't know how to love. Anything I couldn't control. I see now that silence wasn't strength, and absence wasn't protection. I hope, wherever you are, you've found warmth. And if you have, hold on to it. Your father." Gregory didn't speak for a long time. Brenda placed her hand gently on his knee. "You don't have to forgive everything." He nodded slowly. "But I don't have to carry it all either." That night, Gregory lit a candle for his father. He didn't cry, but he sat still for a long time, holding Brenda's hand, letting silence be something healing instead of cold. The following week, Julian dropped by unannounced. He flopped onto the couch and said, "I think I met someone." Brenda grinned. "Already?" "Don't start." Gregory handed him a glass of water. "Tell us about her." Julian hesitated. "Her name's Celine. She's in software testing. Smart, funny, intimidatingly confident." Brenda's eyes sparkled. "I like her already." Julian glanced at Gregory. "I told her about what happened. The fake marriage thing. Thought she'd freak, but she didn't. What did she say? Gregory asked. She said, "Well, it worked out for your sister, didn't it?" They all laughed. Gregory clinked his glass against Julian's. To women who see beyond the mess. Julian raised his glass. To second chances. Weeks passed. Spring bloomed. Brenda enrolled in a community art program. She spent afternoons painting again, fingers stained in color, music always playing softly in the background. Gregory started mentoring young tech entrepreneurs, something he never thought he'd enjoy, but found himself invested in. They had created something real, not a mansion of perfection, but a house of soft landings and mutual growth. Brenda's favorite moment came one night when she walked into the living room and found Gregory asleep on the couch, an open book on his chest, and their cat curled at his feet. He used to sleep like someone bracing for disappointment. Now he slept like someone's safe. A few months later, Brenda got an invitation in the mail, an exhibit at the local gallery. One of her paintings had been accepted. She gasped and ran to Gregory, waving the envelope. "I got in." He took her by the waist and spun her once, laughing. "You did it. It's just one piece." "No," he said. "It's the first of many." On the night of the show, Brenda wore a green satin dress, her curls pinned loosely, lips soft pink. Gregory wore navy and stood by her side like he'd never been anywhere else. When the curator introduced Brenda to a group of guests, he called her an emerging artist with a quiet intensity. Brenda smiled politely, but Gregory leaned down and whispered, "He should have said radiant." She chuckled, nudging him. "Behave." "I am. Admiring my wife is good behavior." As they left the gallery hand in hand, Brenda glanced back at her painting hanging in the spotlight. It was called The Contract, a visual piece of torn lines woven into gold, leaf and soft watercolor, symbolizing destruction turned into beauty. A critic had commented, "There's pain in it, but also peace." She knew exactly where that came from. They got home late. Gregory unbuttoned his shirt, watching her take off her earrings. "I was proud of you tonight." Brenda turned. "I was proud of us." He paused. "Do you ever think about how it all started?" Brenda walked over, placed her hands on his chest. "I used to," she said. "But now, I just think about where we are." He kissed her deeply, softly, and they undressed not as strangers in arrangement, but as lovers in presence. That night, he held her tightly and whispered in the dark, "You were never invisible to me. I was just afraid of being seen." She whispered back, "I see you now." And for the first time in his life, he believed it. Gregory wasn't used to weekends that felt slow, not sluggish, not boring, just peaceful. Before Brenda, his weekends were extensions of the work week, emails, contracts, back-to-back calls. Even the silence of his penthouse used to be filled with financial projections and strategy decks. But now, his calendar was blank every Saturday morning. Because Saturday morning belonged to her. They had built rituals without realizing it. Coffee first, always together, always at the small round table by the balcony. Brenda made it strong, with honey instead of sugar, and Gregory always sliced. Fruit, even though she teased him for obsessing over perfect cubes. "I think you might secretly be a robot," she joked once, holding up a strawberry square like it was evidence. He shrugged. "I like symmetry." Brenda bit into it. "I like when you smile after I insult you." He looked up. "That's because I'm plotting." "Plotting what?" "To keep you here forever." She laughed then. Not because he was joking, but because for once she knew he wasn't. One of those Saturdays, she walked into the room holding a canvas tucked under her arm. "I want to paint you." Gregory blinked. "Me." Brenda smirked. "Yes, you. Don't worry. You won't have to pose shirtless and lie across a velvet couch." His brow arched. "Are you sure? That sounds oddly flattering." She chuckled. "Behave. I want to paint who you are now. The version I see, not the one the press talks about." He looked at her then. "And what version is that? The one that learned to feel?" Gregory's throat tightened, but he nodded. "Okay, I trust you." She studied him for days, sometimes while he worked, sometimes when he cooked, often when he read quietly with glasses slipping down his nose. He pretended not to notice. But one night she caught him watching her back, brush in hand, brow furrowed, and he said, "You paint like you're telling a secret." Brenda smiled. "Because I am—" Meanwhile, Brenda's world began expanding again. The art community welcomed her slowly but warmly. She started attending workshops, met other creators, got invited to show a few more pieces at smaller galleries. Gregory encouraged her at every step. He even rearranged meetings to attend her workshops when guests were allowed. He never said much, just stood in the back, tall and proud, soaking in her light. One evening she asked, "You don't find these events dull?" He shook his head. "I spent my life building things with numbers." "You build with color. It's different and beautiful." She blinked. "You think I'm beautiful? I think you're the most powerful thing I've ever witnessed." And he meant it, because for the first time, Gregory no longer felt ashamed of who he was before. He didn't feel like a broken puzzle piece trying to fit someone else's picture. He didn't hide behind spreadsheets or walls. He didn't flinch at her touch. Instead, he leaned into her warmth. He let her paint streaks of color into his grayscale world. And slowly, the man who used to avoid his own reflection started looking in the mirror with quiet pride. They hosted their first dinner together, not for business, for friends. Gregory cooked. Brenda arranged the table. They invited Julian and Celine, and a few new art friends Brenda had grown close to. The apartment smelled like rosemary and garlic. The walls buzzed with laughter. Music played. Gregory's playlist, surprisingly full of soul and jazz. At one point, Brenda caught him standing in the hallway, watching everyone. "You okay?" she asked. He nodded, slowly. "I've never had this before." She smiled. "Then let's have more of it." He leaned down, kissed her temple and whispered, "Thank you for bringing me life." Later that night, they lay in bed, the sheets warm around them, the soft hum of city life lulling them to sleep. Brenda rested her head on his chest. "Do you ever miss the way things were?" He thought for a moment. "No. Because I didn't know how cold I was until you walked in." She looked up. "Cold?" "Yes. And you." He brushed a curl from her forehead. "You made the fire worth staying near." She didn't reply with words. She kissed him, slowly, and they moved together like a promise kept. In the days that followed, they redecorated parts of the penthouse, not out of necessity, but to make it feel more like theirs. The piano stayed, of course, but they added color to the walls. Plants in corners, art in the hallway, pictures, not stiff corporate headshots, but soft photos of them laughing on a beach, of Brenda painting while barefoot, of Gregory asleep with his head on her lap. A home was forming, not built from status, but from choice. Gregory surprised her one Sunday with a short trip to Vermont. They stayed in a cabin, tucked between golden trees. No reception, no emails, just each other. They hiked. They cooked over a fire. Brenda sketched the view while Gregory read aloud from a book she loved as a child. "You know," she said as they sat watching the stars, "you've become kind of romantic." He raised a brow. "Don't tell the board." "I won't," she whispered. "They'd never believe me." He pulled her close. "What do you see when you look at me now?" She didn't answer immediately. Then softly, a man becoming, and he smiled, because for the first time, he finally agreed. A month after the Vermont trip, Gregory took an unexpected step. He cleared his entire schedule for 2 days, something his assistant claimed he'd never done in 12 years, not even when he was sick. Brenda found him at the breakfast table with a checklist and a frown. "You planning a takeover?" she teased, pouring coffee. He looked up, deadpan. "Yes, of your time." She blinked. "Excuse me? I'm taking you somewhere. No phones, no meetings, just us." Brenda smiled slowly. "Is this your version of being spontaneous?" "I Googled it," he said without flinching. She laughed so hard she spilled coffee on her pajama top. That somewhere turned out to be a quiet bed and breakfast by a lake, a place. Gregory had stumbled upon through a recommendation from an employee's spouse. They had a room with tall windows and a view of the water. No luxury, no glass elevators, just old wooden floors, a fireplace, and time. Brenda sat by the lake that evening, sketching in her travel notebook, her feet dipped in the cool water. Gregory joined her, sitting close but quiet. She handed him the book. Inside were small sketches. Their Vermont cabin, the art studio, Julian laughing, him sleeping with glasses slipping down. Dozens of small moments she had captured without him knowing. These are... He stopped. You did all these? She nodded. It helps me remember how far we've come. He looked at her. I didn't know I could look like someone you'd want to remember. She didn't look away. You didn't, because you never gave anyone the chance. That night, in front of the fireplace, Gregory shared something he hadn't told anyone. He had been engaged once before. Brenda didn't flinch. Tell me. He explained it slowly, carefully. She was someone he met in college. Their relationship was built on ambition, not affection. She wanted power, security. He wanted loyalty. Neither of them understood intimacy. When she left him for one of his mentors, he didn't cry. He didn't even confront her. He shut down. From then on, I only pursued things I could control, he said. Numbers, titles, strategy. And then, you, Brenda traced a fingertip down his hand. You didn't control me. You were the only person who walked in when everyone else demanded I come out. He looked at her, voice tight. I didn't deserve you then. You don't have to deserve love, she whispered. You just have to choose it. He pulled her into his arms. Then I choose it. I choose you. Every time, back in the city, they returned to their rhythms, only now with less armor, more warmth. Brenda submitted a proposal to launch a community art center in the inner city. Gregory helped her create the budget and pitch it to the city council. They didn't announce that they were married. They didn't use Wells Tech influence. They went as themselves. When the project got approved, Brenda cried in the car. Gregory kissed her hand. You built something bigger than us. No, she said. We built something because you believed in me before I did. One evening, Julian visited again, this time with Celine. Gregory and Julian had become less awkward around each other. Still not close, but there was ease now. They spoke about software and systems and architecture. After dinner, Celine leaned toward Brenda in the kitchen. He really changed, she said, nodding toward Gregory. Brenda smiled. He didn't change. He thawed. That winter, snow fell early. Gregory lit the fireplace more often. Brenda painted by the windows. And one night, she caught him staring at a photo. An old one, his mother. Young, smiling, holding a tiny Gregory. I found it in a box, he said. Brenda walked over, resting her chin on his shoulder. She loved you, he sighed. She left. She was hurting. You're not her. You stayed. That's what matters. He nodded slowly. I've spent my life building glass towers, but I never realized the strongest thing I could build was a home. Brenda kissed the side of his face. And it doesn't need steel or marble, just honesty. Later that month, she surprised him with a sketch. It wasn't of him. It was of them, on the rooftop, wrapped in blankets, laughing. He looked at it for a long time, then turned to her and said, You made me human. She shook her head. You were always human. You just stopped hiding it. They stood there, facing the drawing together as the snow fell softly outside. And for the first time in his life, Gregory Wells didn't feel like a man trapped by legacy. He felt free, with her. The snow was still falling when Brenda stepped into the new space. It was dusty, wide, and echoing with potential. An old library building downtown that had been closed for years. The city had handed it over to her art collective after months of paperwork, and Gregory's silent support in the background. She walked slowly through the empty rooms, her boots echoing against cracked tile and bare walls. This is it, she whispered. Gregory stood beside her, hands in his pockets. You're going to bring it back to life. She glanced at him. We are. But he shook his head. You've always had the vision. I'm just here to make sure nothing gets in your way. That was the thing about him now. He didn't try to lead her. He followed when she asked. He stood beside her when she needed, and he stepped back when it was her moment. They were no longer two people bound by a contract. They were a team, a quiet force. Brenda poured herself into the project. She sketched designs on napkins, took meetings with local artists, brought Julian in to help with the tech side of things. He installed a digital gallery system that would showcase student art. Every time she came home covered in paint or dust, Gregory smiled like she was holding the sun in her hands. You always come home glowing, he told her one night. Because I'm doing what I love, she replied, curling into his chest. He kissed her forehead. You look like freedom. She closed her eyes. So do you. At Wells Tech, Gregory began shifting his leadership style. He wasn't the ice-cold CEO anymore. He took feedback, asked deeper questions, stepped into the break room occasionally just to greet people. Brenda heard it through whispers, employees saying they felt less afraid to speak up, that he'd started a mentorship program for junior staff, that he remembered birthdays. It stunned the board, but the company thrived. When an interviewer asked about the sudden change in his public tone, Gregory simply said, I started listening instead of managing. The journalist looked confused. Gregory only smiled. Valentine's Day came quietly. Brenda didn't expect much. She was never one for grand gestures, and they'd both been busy. But that morning, she woke up to the smell of something baking. When she stepped into the kitchen, there was Gregory, shirt untucked, flour on his hands, pulling cinnamon rolls from the oven. He looked guilty. They're not pretty. She blinked, touched. You baked? I tried. He scratched his neck. They're shaped like, well, not hearts. Brenda took one, bit into it, and smiled. They're perfect. He leaned against the counter, watching her. I never believed in this day, or anything sentimental, but now. He hesitated. Brenda reached for his hand. Now, I believe in moments, not perfection, just the kind that make you feel something. She smiled. Then you're already romantic. Later that day, he gave her a small box, not jewelry, not expensive. Inside was a folded piece of sheet music. She looked up. I wrote something, he said softly. It's not finished, but it's yours. She held the paper like a fragile thing. You composed this? He nodded. I haven't written music in years, but I remembered the sound of your laugh, and I followed it. Tears rose in her eyes. You never stop surprising me, she said. He took her face in his hands. That's what love is, isn't it? Letting someone surprise you, and not running when they do. They kissed, warm and unhurried, while the snow painted the windows in silence. The art center opened that spring. The mayor came. Local press covered it. Kids spilled into the space, carrying backpacks and pencils and hope. Brenda stood at the entrance that morning, watching it all. She wore a soft yellow dress. Her curls framed her face. And beside her, Gregory, pressed slacks, calm smile, held her hand like he'd always been part of this world. People kept thanking her, but every time she glanced at him, because she knew none of it would have happened without that night in the penthouse. The soup, the sticky notes, the piano, the unraveling of their walls. Love didn't come from flowers or diamonds. It came from patience, from paying attention, from letting silence speak louder than noise. And Brenda had learned that sometimes the coldest people were just waiting for someone to stay long enough to melt the ice. That night, after the center closed, they walked home. No driver, no heels, just sneakers and quiet. You know, Gregory said as they neared the building, I never told you something. Brenda looked up. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a tiny velvet bag. Inside was her wedding ring, the same one from the contract. But it looked different now. New band, same stone, polished like a fresh promise. I had it reset, he said. Because the old one was built on terms. Brenda stared at it. I'm not asking for a wedding, he added. We already have a life. But if you'll wear this time, by choice, I'll know you're still choosing me. Brenda took it slowly, slid it on, and whispered, I never stopped. Spring turned to summer, and with it came something Brenda hadn't felt in years. Stillness without fear. The old restlessness she once carried, the worry that she had to keep, earning her place, proving her worth, faded with each passing day. She no longer looked for signs of retreat in Gregory's eyes. She found steadiness there. Every time, one warm Saturday, they returned to the rooftop. It had become their quiet place. No press, no meetings, just a view of the skyline and the life they were building behind it. Gregory brought 2 glasses of water and sat beside her on the blanket. She was barefoot, her toes brushing the edge of the concrete. You're quiet, he said gently. I'm happy, she replied. It still surprises me. He looked out at the city. Me too. She turned to him. You ever think about what would have happened if we didn't meet this way? He shrugged. We might have never looked twice. Do you regret that? He shook his head. No, we needed the broken parts first, to understand what it meant to choose love, not just fall into it. Brenda smiled. That's the most romantic thing you've ever said. I had help. He smirked. They made brunch the next morning, together. It had become their ritual. Brenda always burned the toast. Gregory always over-scrambled the eggs, but they didn't care. The kitchen was filled with jazz. He kissed the back of her neck while she washed berries. She smeared flour on his cheek just to see him fake annoyed. And when the doorbell rang, they froze mid-laugh. Brenda opened the door. Julian stood there, a stunned expression on his face. Behind him, Celine, holding a tiny white envelope. Brenda blinked. Is everything okay? Julian grinned, wide and guilty. We, eloped. Vegas. Last night. Celine raised the envelope. Surprise? Gregory stared for a beat. Then he cracked the rarest smile, wide, real. Congratulations, he said, holding the door wider. Inside, Brenda hugged her brother tight, her eyes misty. You're full of surprises, Julian laughed. Guess you rubbed off on me. That night, Brenda sat beside Gregory on the sofa. The apartment was quiet again, the kind of quiet that didn't sting. You're going to be an uncle, she teased. Gregory looked stunned. Wait, what? She nodded toward her brother and Celine's earlier chatter. Celine's pregnant. You didn't hear? He blinked. I was too busy trying to figure out if eloping is a smart financial move. Brenda laughed until she couldn't breathe. When she caught her breath, she said, You're going to be the calm, responsible one in their lives. He looked at her. Then, what are you going to be? The wild aunt who teaches them to color outside the lines. He leaned over and kissed her nose. You already do that for me. Later that week, Brenda walked through the art center and paused by a new mural. It was a mosaic made from broken tiles painted over in gold. It shimmered in the sunlight like something holy. A student explained the design. Each tile represents a piece of someone's story. We break, but then we get put back together, more beautiful than before. Brenda stood there a long time, staring. She didn't say it out loud, but she knew. That was them. All of it. One night, weeks later, Gregory woke her up with a whisper. Come with me. Brenda blinked sleepily. What time is it? Late. He took her hand, led her to the rooftop. The city was asleep, quiet and glowing under the stars. He set down a small Bluetooth speaker, pressed play. Soft piano music filled the air. She recognized it instantly. The piece you wrote? He nodded. She moved closer. He reached for her hand. Dance with me. Barefoot under the sky, they danced. Slowly. No choreography, just heartbeats and moonlight. When the song ended, he pulled her closer. Do you remember the first time we touched like this? I do. He kissed her temple. I was terrified. She pulled back. Of me. Of what I'd feel. Of who I'd become. And now. He met her eyes. Now. I'd break every rule just to feel this again. As the season turned, They didn't make grand plans. They just lived. He still went to work. She still painted. But they shared things more easily now. Stories, laughter, silence. He wasn't perfect. He still had cold days. She still had doubts. But now, they spoke about them. Now, they held each other through them. And that was more than either of them thought they could ever have. One Sunday, Brenda stood by the window, sunlight bathing her face. Gregory came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. She leaned into him. "I used to think love was loud, like fireworks or big gestures. And now?" She turned, kissed him softly. "Now I know. It's warm, steady. And sometimes, quiet is everything." He held her tighter. In that moment, with the city behind them and years ahead, they both knew they were finally home. Together. 3 years later, the old library was now one of the city's brightest spaces. Children painted on easels under sunlight streaming through restored windows. Teens with second-hand cameras curated photography walls. Adults, too, came after work, many of them employees Gregory had quietly encouraged to take art classes there. Brenda stood by the doorway, arms crossed loosely, watching a girl in overalls swirl watercolor onto paper. There was no camera, no spotlight. But her smile that day? Pure joy. Gregory arrived an hour later. She didn't hear him come in, but she always felt him. He slid his arms around her waist from behind, rested his chin on her shoulder. "How's your gallery looking?" She tilted her head toward the far wall. Someone painted a unicorn on the fire extinguisher again. He chuckled. "Rebellious spirit. Better than corporate silence," she whispered. Gregory kissed her cheek. "That's your legacy." Brenda looked around. "Ours." He didn't argue. He'd long since stopped deflecting his worth. At Wells Tech, things had shifted too. Gregory had hired a COO, someone younger, more extroverted, more excited about public presentations. He still made the big decisions, but he had stepped back from the day-to-day. He told the board it was time for fresh voices. When pressed by media outlets, Gregory simply said, "I've built my company. Now I want to build my life." And for the first time, no one questioned it, because his track record, and the woman always quietly beside him, spoke louder than any statement. One afternoon, Brenda returned home to find Gregory in the kitchen, making grilled cheese. "You've been humming," she noted, amused. "I have not." "You have," she said, walking to the fridge. "You're in a good mood." "I finished something." She turned, curious. "Something?" He pulled a small black notebook from the counter. "I wrote the last page of the music journal." Brenda froze. "The one you've been writing in since the soup," he said with a half smile. She stepped forward, touched the book. "Can I read it?" He nodded. But instead of handing it to her, he opened the last page and read aloud. "My life was built on silence. I thought control was safety. Then she arrived, loud in quiet ways, color in a grey space. I didn't fall in love. I unraveled into it. And every day since I've been learning to stay." Brenda's throat tightened. He closed the book. "I wanted you to hear it from me first." She couldn't speak right away, so she kissed him. Soft, grateful. Later that night, they lay on the couch. The TV played an old black-and-white film. Neither of them watched it. Brenda had her head on his chest, tracing circles on his shirt. "I used to think I wasn't built for love," she whispered, "that I'd given too much of myself away." Gregory's hand moved through her curls. "You didn't give anything away. You were just waiting for someone who'd know what to do with all that depth." She looked up at him. "And you did." "I'm still learning," he said, smiling, "but I'm not afraid of it anymore." Brenda leaned up and rested her forehead against his. "Neither am I." Julian and Celine visited the next morning. They brought their toddler, Rowan, with big eyes and a laugh like bubbles. Brenda picked him up, kissed his cheek, and swayed him gently around the living room. "You're good with him," Celine said. Gregory stood nearby, watching Brenda hold the baby. "She always has been," he said quietly. Julian raised a brow. Planning on your own soon? Gregory didn't flinch. Brenda paused, glancing over at him. His eyes met hers. Calm, steady. If we do, he said slowly, it'll be because we want to, not because anyone expects it. Brenda smiled. Exactly. And for the first time, no one changed the subject. They weren't chasing anything anymore. Not perfection, not approval. They had found their rhythm, and that was enough. Brenda still burned toast. Gregory still hated loud restaurants. Some days they argued about dumb things, groceries, lost keys, whether to buy an air fryer. But love wasn't the absence of friction. It was the ability to come back to each other over and over again. One evening, as summer waned, they visited the rooftop again. The same blanket, the same skyline, but now their hands found each other naturally. Gregory set down a small Polaroid camera and clicked a photo. Brenda mid-laugh. He held it up as it developed. I want to frame this, he said. Put it in my office. Why? Because it reminds me not to go back. She didn't ask where back was. She knew. Back inside, she curled up on the couch and watched him flip through their photo album. No titles, just memories, moments no one else saw, moments that built a life, a quiet, chosen, tender life. Together, fall brought golden leaves and slower days. Brenda started teaching a weekly art class at the community center, small sessions for women who had once been invisible too. Some came from corporate worlds, others from silence. Many were healing from relationships that asked too much and gave too little. She didn't preach. She just offered them brushes and space. And when they painted, she painted too. Gregory often came by, not to watch, to help. He restocked paint trays, picked up coffee, built easels in the back. Quietly, consistently. At first, the women whispered, "That's your husband? He's..." Nothing like mine was. Brenda never explained. She didn't have to. They saw it for themselves, in the way he looked at her, in the way he listened, in the way he stayed. On their 4th anniversary, they didn't throw a party. Instead, Gregory handed her an envelope. No card, just a sketch inside, a small house with ivy on the front porch. Her eyes widened. Is this? He nodded. 3 blocks from the art center. Backyard. Lots of light. She ran her thumb over the drawing. You want to move? I want a home we build together, he said. Not the glass cage I brought you into. Brenda swallowed hard. Are you sure? He cupped her face. I've never been more. Moving wasn't glamorous. They packed in old boxes, laughed over memories, argued about what to keep. Brenda refused to let go of the chipped mug with her paintbrushes. Gregory insisted on keeping the piano. They compromised, kept both. On their first night in the new house, they lay on the floor with takeout and string lights. No furniture, just quiet joy. Brenda opened a small art gallery 6 months later. It wasn't flashy, no press release, but it became a haven. Local artists donated work. Kids brought in finger paint masterpieces. Gregory helped build the frames. He never missed an opening. He stood beside her every time. She didn't need his presence to be loud. She needed it to be real, and it always was. Julian's tech startup took off a year later. Brenda and Gregory were at the launch party. Matching outfits, quiet pride. At one point, Julian pulled her aside. You know, when I first begged you to take that meeting with Gregory, I never imagined this. She laughed. You didn't exactly beg. You cried. He rolled his eyes. Semantics. Then, softly, you're the best thing that ever happened to him. Even if he took a while to figure it out, Brenda looked across the room. Gregory was holding a baby while explaining investment strategies to a room full of developers. She smiled. Yeah, she said, but he's the best thing that ever happened to me too. Time passed. Grey streaks found their way into Gregory's hair. Brenda's art style shifted. More bold colors, less symmetry. Their lives slowed, but their love stayed full. Even on the quietest days, he still reached for her hand. Even on the hardest mornings, She still waited for his breath to steady against hers. They built a rhythm from scratch, not perfect, but honest, and that was everything. One snowy evening, they sat by the fireplace. Gregory played soft piano while Brenda sketched nearby. Outside, the world was white and hushed. Inside, peace. Brenda glanced up. He was watching her. What? He kept playing. Just, you look like everything I never knew I needed. She walked over, sat beside him on the bench, and rested her head on his shoulder. You look like everything I finally believed I deserved. He stopped playing, kissed the top of her head. They didn't need vows anymore. They lived them. Every day. As the camera fades out on their story, here's what we hope you remember. Love doesn't always start with fireworks. Sometimes it starts with silence, with sacrifice, with a quiet act of kindness that shatters a lifetime of walls. Sometimes love grows not in grand gestures, but in the moments no one else sees, in late night soup, in piano melodies, in choosing to stay when walking away might be easier. This story is for everyone who's been told they're too quiet, too guarded, too complicated. You are not too much. You are not too little. You are exactly enough for the kind of love that stays. If this story touched your heart, don't scroll away. Drop A in the comments if you believe love can grow in the quiet. Share this with someone who's been through a hard season. Like, comment, and subscribe to join the Mr. Charles Stories family. We bring you real, raw, and redemptive American love stories every week. See you in the next one.